Fragrance family, what's going on? It's your man Gator, better known as the Novice Nose out here in these fragrance streets. Man, if you have been watching any of my content recently here, you know I did a first impressions on this guy right here. This is the newest drop from French Avenue. It is called Atlantis. Very much anticipated. It is inspired by one of my favorite DNAs on the market. That's that Room 1015 Wavechild. Well, I've seen all I had to see, man. Y'all already know the drill, man. Go ahead, pull up, Stay tuned. Now, again, the fragrance that we're talking about today is the newest release from French Avenue. It is their new, much anticipated here, especially if fans of the original fragrance here. This is French Avenue Atlantis Extrait. As you can see the bottle here, beautiful glass, the blue glass here on this bottle, very reminiscent of the Chaos fragrance and Aether, of course, from French Avenue. Same bottle style and everything. Now, as you probably are aware, this fragrance is actually inspired by a fragrance called Room 1015 Wavechild, one of my favorite fragrances to drop in the last few years here. Gorgeous watermelon, coconutty kind of vibe. It gives vacation all up and down with that fragrance. And so when I heard about this one, I was really pumped to see what this one was about. So let me get into the notes on here. Basically, the notes do mirror Room 1015 Wavechild. So your top notes are going to be orange, lemon and mandarin, orange. Your middle notes are going to be watermelon and coconut. And then your base notes are going to be cacao, ambergris, and amber wood. So just right off the top, man, I did a first impressions on this fragrance maybe about, about a couple of days ago here. And I was all over the place on that first impression, man, because it kind of came across a little bit synthetic. It was kind of weird. Like it hadn't had itself together just yet. I was picking up like synthetic-y type of watermelon. I was picking up woods. I was picking up all kinds of crazy stuff. So that night, and part of that is because I was actually compared it to the original that night. So I let it, kind of rest all, overnight, man. And I came back to it the next day. And just in that one day, it seemed to have gotten itself together a little bit. Now, let me get a good spray on this here so you can see what it looks like. Of course, French Avenue is always going to have a pretty decent atomizer here on their products. So, and I love the way this smells in the air. Okay, so how close is it to the original? It's pretty close. There are some differences in here, but these are differences that I love about this fragrance. So when it opens up, you're getting a little bit of a candied kind of watermelon. You get a little bit of citrus in there, and that citrus kind of accents it just a tad. But for the most part, you're getting like, a profuse amount of the candied style of watermelon that comes across in here. That is a gorgeous watermelon. It's not overly synthetic or anything like that. It's not as quite as realistic as the watermelon in the original Wavechild, but it is definitely a beautiful way to go. Now, one big difference between the original and this one is that in the original, at the opening, you get that melon, you get a good bit of that watermelon, and the citrus is kind of muted in there as well. This one, I think, uses the citrus more as an accent on the top. You can barely tell that there's kind of a citrus blend going on with the original Wavechild, but that is because they use the cacao. Bumping the mic. They use the cacao in there and they blend it so perfectly with that watermelon to where it's like one band, one sound. I mean, the notes are blended so well together, so smooth. It's just a fruity, chocolatey dream. This one's not that. So what this does is it comes across with a little bit of a candied watermelon. Like I said, the citrus kind of accents it at the top. But one of the things that I actually like about how this presents is the cacao isn't necessarily a really prevalent note at the top, but it is sitting there in the background, and it kind of gives it, and it's more of an earthy cacao than you find in like Wavechild comes across almost like a sweetened style of cacao, and that could be because of the sweetness of the other aspects of that fragrance. In here, you get to pick out a little bit more of the earthy nature of the cacao here. It's still slightly chocolatey, but that slightly chocolatiness takes a back seat to the earthiness that cacao brings to it. Now, along with that earthiness, it kind of comes across a little bit more woody than the original fragrance does. And that, to me, makes this an actually more masculine leaning fragrance, especially in the opening. Now, the other big difference that I find between the original fragrance and this fragrance is that in the original Wavechild, there is a progression that goes on with the coconut. Now, that coconut comes in there and really kind of sweetens it, smooths out it gives kind of almost a lactonic vibe, but it smooths out that DNA really, really well. It adds to the sweetness, but not in like an overly sugary way. It just kind of adds to this smooth, sweet, harmonious kind of vibe when you're wearing Wavechild. You don't really pick up much coconut at all in here. Like, I get a little bit of a sweetness that could be coconut, but for the most part, the coconut isn't like a definite, like, present vibe in here like it is in the original. Now, one of the things that is a very present vibe, though, is this one has a little bit more of an ambery kind of nature too. So while the original kind of goes into more of that transition from a watermelon to cacao and kind of that chocolatey, kind of slightly fruity feel into like that coconut, almost tropical kind of vibe, this one kind of takes it and you keep that melon, you keep that actual like candied watermelon, but it comes across with an ambery woody vibe that kind of enters into the chat. And that ambery woody vibe is what actually kind of takes over this fragrance. This fragrance, once it gets into that like hour, well, maybe, like 45 minutes to an hour. Once it gets into that stage, you kind of get what you're going to get. You're going to get something gorgeous, though. That the way that this thing comes across, like I said, you don't really pick up the coconut, but you pick up that melon throughout the life, which is a little bit different than the original Wavechild. Now, with Wavechild, I get the melon and everything at the top, probably for the first like hour or so, and then you start really getting more into like the heart of it, with the cacao and the coconut, and just a slightly woody nuance going into the body. But it transitions, it moves, it kind of breathes. This one actually stays linear, but I'm telling you, it's in a good way that it stays linear, because it keeps some of the best aspects of Wavechild throughout the remainder of the life of the fragrance. Now, I mentioned the life, and that's the other thing that really surprised me about this fragrance. So when I first sprayed it on that next day after that, after the first impressions and everything that next day, sprayed it on, did my usual shower routine and all that kind of stuff, sprayed it, and I was like, okay, we're going to be going out, wearing this for the day. My wife, I walked in the room, and, at first she's like, oh, that smells really nice. That smells really nice. But I kind of sat in the room a little bit, and, our master bed's pretty nice size. And, I'm sitting in there, and I'm kind of working on something on the side of the bed, and kind of, taking care of some stuff. And she was like, it's getting strong. Like, it's really, really starting to get strong. And I was like, really? And I started kind of noticing it too, that it was popping. It was really pushing off of my skin. Here's the thing with this one. When you first spray it on, this is an extrait, by the way. When you first spray it on, you may not realize just how potent this thing is, but as it sits on the skin, as it warms up, it becomes nuclear. So I would say be careful when you actually spray this on. I would say max this thing out about 5 sprays, because, and which is a little bit different than the original. Now the original is a little bit more potent than what people give it credit for. The original Wavechild is actually a really it's not like a strong projector, but it has a really nice sillage. Like you get the sillage all throughout, I mean, a good 5-6 hours after applying that fragrance. It just floats in the air, even though you could put your nose right here and try to sniff, and you won't really smell anything, but it is pumping off of your skin. This one, on the other hand, I mean, it starts to project. Like, it literally, like, once it started warming up on my skin, it filled the room. So just a word to the wise, man, this one is going to, it lasted 12 hours on my skin, because I did a live after, you know, I had ran errands and all that kind of stuff after the LSU game that night, and it was still on my skin. I was still smelling it after 12 hours. So it definitely has potency. It definitely has longevity. Now, it was projecting pretty strong for that first like 5, well, I would say maybe 3 to 4 hours. And I was giving it maybe about an arm's length or so, even into the 5th hour. I mean, it was still kind of booming off of my skin. Now, I was moving around a good bit as well. So, you know, as the skin is kind of heating up, that extrait is dense. So it's got a lot of molecules to pop off of your skin. So overall, I really enjoy this. I like the wearing on this. It's a little bit more masculine leaning than the original. So for my fellas who were kind of thinking that Wavechild was a little bit too feminine leaning, put your nose on this, because this one it maintains a little bit of the sweetness and that watermelony melon vibe here. It's a little bit, like I say, a little bit more candied here, but it has a little bit of a woodiness in the undertone of it. It's a little bit more earthy. I think that this would be a good fragrance for the guy who really looked at Wavechild and was like, it's a little bit too feminine, the coconut especially. This one doesn't really have that. To me, it doesn't have as much of a tropical feel as Wavechild does either. But when you're talking about a fresh, fruity, long-lasting fragrance, man, this is going to be one that is for the books, guys. Now, guys, to say that I was surprised by this one is kind of an understatement. I have been anticipating the release of it since I first saw it kind of enter the zeitgeist a little bit, but I am definitely impressed by this. They did something that I liked when inspired by fragrances do, or clone houses do here. What they did was they took that DNA and they said, hey, let's cater this to a different crowd, or let's make this, in our opinion, a little bit of a different swag to it. And that is definitely what they did here. This thing now leans a little bit more masculine than the original does. Now, that being said, it's not something that a woman cannot rock. And I think a lot of women are gonna really dig this one, because it has a little bit more earthiness to it, but it does retain that watermelon, the candied watermelon, that beautiful note in here a lot longer than the original does. You could carry the watermelon all throughout, even though it's a little bit of a different style of watermelon. Like I said, it's a little bit candied. That being said, I think that a lot of people out there are gonna really like the variation, the little tweaks that they did to this DNA. I'm looking forward to actually wearing this around in the last remaining kind of dog days of summer that we have here. It's not quite as tropical, ozonic as the original is, but it definitely gives you a fresh vibe, slightly fruity, and it's gonna give you longevity out the ass. When I say this thing lasted 12 hours on my skin, it really did last 12 hours on my skin here. This is a gorgeous fragrance, long lasting, checks all the boxes, man. So if you have not been aware that this thing is out there, get your nose on it, see what you think about it. For those who have gotten your nose on it, what did you think about this fragrance? Go ahead and drop it down in the comments, man. And as always, guys, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, Share this video with somebody you know that loves fragrances, guys. In the meantime, like we always say, man, no matter what you're doing, however you're doing it, make sure you make today the best day ever on purpose. Peace out.